Hi everyone, I'm the Rambling Photon, and today I'm going to be talking about the morals you can afford. And by you, I mean we, as a society. So to start this off, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of economics, and I'm going to be talking about some economic concepts that are not necessarily taught in Econ 101, so this is going to be Econ 102-ish. So, we're going to be talking about morality in the context of budget curves. Now, a budget curve, you have on one axis, you have oranges or widgets or something, widget A, let's call it. And on the other axis, you'll have literally everything else. Now, the idea is that you can only afford, with a fixed amount of resources, you can only afford some maximum quantity of either one of these. Okay? So, if you spent all of your money on widget A only, okay, you would end up with some quantity of widget A. And if you spent fewer resources obtaining widget A, you would have more of literally everything else. Okay? And there's a line or a curve that goes between those 2 points, and that is your budget curve. That is what you are able to afford. Okay? So you're able to afford some quantity of widget A and some quantity of literally everything else. Now, we can replace widget A with anything of our choosing, any entity that we want. So we can do it, replace it with morals. We can replace it with immorals. We can replace it with time or money or basically anything that we want. Now, what most people do is they represent the literally everything else by money, right? So the idea is that you have some fixed amount of money, okay? So that's the sum quantity of money that you have. And then if you spend literally all of your money on widget A or whatever it is on the other axis, you have nothing else. You have literally nothing else, no other money, and you have a whole bunch of widget A. Okay? Now, why do I do this? I do this because I think it's an interesting framework to think of what I call morals, what I'm putting as morals on this bottom axis. Now, I also put immorals, and this would be things that are actively evil. You can't constantly be doing actively evil things, so that it still qualifies, right? You can only be as evil as you can afford, also. But this is a concept that I think gets lost in a lot of conversations that we have about policy, right? Especially like the arguments about the healthcare bill that have been coming up. We need to be willing to admit that we might not be able to afford all of the morals that we want. Okay? Now, that's not to say that morals are a specific item. You can't just like go to a store and buy morals or anything like that. No. But what you can do is spend money on services and products that we consider having a moral end, right? So you can give your money to charity. For example, you can use your money to feed the poor. You can use your money to heal the sick. You can use your money to do all of these things, take care of orphans, whatever. Insert good moral thing here, right? But if you spend all of your money on that, you don't have any money left for your own maintenance. Then you become the poor, right? So this is basically just the idea that there are certain things that you cannot, we cannot go beyond our resources as a society. Now, as an individual, you might be able to say borrow on credit or something similar, but society as a whole can't do that because there's no sort of outside entity that you can borrow from, right? The world can't borrow from Mars yet, right? So we're fixed in our quantity of stuff. We're limited in our ability to spend resources on things. We don't have infinite resources, right? And so when we consider these questions, the reason that we're considering them is because we don't have an infinite resource that we can just spend on these entities, right? And I think it's a very important realization to say that our morals are limited by something. Our morals are limited by our budgets. Okay? And the reason I think this is important to understand is that a lot of the conversations that we're having now, and I think there's sort of a conservative tendency to say, oh, well, XYZ thing didn't matter before, so it shouldn't matter now. Or something similar to that. Like, why are we having all of these debates about gay rights and trans issues and all this gender stuff? Why are we having those conversations now, and why didn't we have them before? And I think the answer is that now we are rich enough as a society to afford them, right? We can make the choices now that we couldn't make before because we didn't have the wealth before, okay? Now, let's sort of make this into a more concrete example. So, talk about, let's say, space in lifeboats, okay? Now, historically, space in lifeboats, and I think pretty much today also, right? Space in lifeboats, women and children first, right? And that's has to do with different types of values and traditional and propagation of the species and all that stuff, right? So, but why were those traditional values? Okay, well, let's think of it from the economic point of view. So you can see my shitty ass sketch representing the seats or benches in this lifeboat, right? Now, our budget, we're constrained by space, okay? So, this is fine if there are few people who need the lifeboat, right? So, if only 2 people need to use the lifeboat, then we have plenty of space. Not an issue. Not at all, right? But if we have 50 people, how are we going to fit them in this lifeboat? Now, let's say that sort of for the average person, right? This lifeboat holds 20 people, okay? Well, now we have 50 people who need to use it. What is the most efficient way to save these people? Now, consider we only have space for an average of 20, right? But we might be able to squeeze in like 25 super skinny people, or 25 kids, or 25 just smaller individuals, right? Well, that's one way to do it, right? Well, that discriminates against fat people. Well, yes, it does. Because fat people take up more space. They cost more in our budget. Men, on average, would probably cost more in our budget, right? So, kids first, because they're going to be smaller. Women next, because on average, they're also going to be smaller than grown men, maybe. Also helps propagate the species. Probably a good thing, right? Now, because in this case we are space poor, we can only have morals enough to save a limited number of people. We can't save everybody, right? Now, in this case, we might also have to make hard decisions about, should we allow the person in the wheelchair into the lifeboat? Do they take up extra space, right? Do we have sick and injured who might have to lie down and take up even more space, right? How do we do that? How much are we willing to sacrifice comfort, right? That's one of our things. Comfort costs space, right? We're not going to have people bring all their bags along unless we have enough room for all the people plus all their bags, right? Again, we're constrained by the resources available. We can only be as moral as those resources allow, okay? And there's nothing evil about that realization, okay? There's nothing evil about saying we can't help everybody. We can't necessarily save everybody. And that's something that I think that a lot of the liberals don't get, is that maybe resources are limited, maybe we can't save everybody yet. And then on the conservative side, I think there's a lack of realization that, why are these things such a big deal now and they weren't before? Well, as I said before, it's because we can afford to now. It's affordable, right? Those morals are things that lie now within our budget. And we as a society have to decide whether or not we are going to spend our resources on those things, or even have the debate as we have to now have the debate as to whether these things are moral or not, and whether to spend resources as a society or not. So that's why we're having these discussions now. So after these pass, right? So like after the trans debate is settled as a society, however, whichever way it goes, I don't know. My personal preference would be some sort of tolerance, but not enabling. So I'm not in favor of spending government money on that sort of thing. But there's a lot that I'm not in favor of spending government money on. So that's not particularly special. Don't feel special. I'm not being transphobic by saying I don't want to spend government money on you. Don't take it that way. You're not that special. So however we let that fall out, there's going to be the next issue as we as a society get richer that is going to come into the spotlight. Right, so something that Sam Harris has said is that we have been expanding the sphere of human compassion, so expanding it to animals, to our pets, and the vegetarians and vegans expand it to all animals, right? Well, as we continue that, the reason we can continue that is, again, because we are getting richer as a society. We are able to afford expanding our spheres of compassion because we have sufficiently taken care of ourselves in some sense. We have sufficiently taken care of the core requirements, the core needs of the society. And so now the needs that we're taking care of are the ones that previously existed on the margins. And they are going to become, as we get richer, assuming we are getting richer, part of the core. Now, one possible hiccup in that is if we don't get richer, if we start getting poorer again. And if we get poorer, then we will have to return to the old system, or one of the older systems, or some variant of it, because the morals that we can afford will be less than the morals that we can afford now. Okay, so those are some of my thoughts on morals. Just one of the sort of basic ideas that I think is somewhat missing from the conversation. Anyway, I've been the Rambling Photon. If you like my content, like, share, subscribe, all that shit. Hope to catch you next time.